Hello, History 363. So today we're going to talk about the war that the Romans fight with their old Numidian allies, led by a king named Jugurtha. And this proves to be a dispiriting war that causes Rome to doubt a significant chunk of its senatorial aristocracy, and also leads to the rise of a general named Gaius Marius, who quickly becomes the most powerful man in Rome, at least for a while. So remember, Numidia, Massinissa had been king of Numidia as a reward for collaborating with Scipio Africanus during the Second Punic War. Massinissa lives a long life and actually helps to instigate the Third Punic War before his death in his 80s. And he is succeeded by Micipsa, who also has a long reign. Micipsa dies in 118 BC. And Micipsa, however, manages to completely botch his succession. And the main problem is Micipsa has two sons who maybe aren't the most talented of figures, but he has an extremely talented nephew who he adopts as a third son, and this nephew is named Jugurtha. And he therefore decides that he's going to set up his two sons and his nephew in a power-sharing arrangement after his death. This, of course, is a disaster waiting to happen, particularly since Jugurtha is craftier and more clever than his adoptive brothers. So Micipsa dies in 118 BC, and civil war almost immediately breaks out between Jugurtha and the other two sons of Micipsa. And Rome tries to intervene in this civil war in 116 BC. It sends none other than Lucius Opimius. Lucius Opimius, remember, is the consul who had really led the sort of brutal assizes over the surviving followers of Gaius Gracchus. He was a real villain in the eyes of those who supported Gracchus. So Opimius comes in 116 and decides that he's simply going to divide the kingdom up amongst these three figures. Jugurtha gets western Numidia, which is probably the worst chunk of the kingdom. But it's rumored that Jugurtha had bribed Opimius so that he got anything at all. And so at any rate, this settlement, as you can imagine, doesn't last very long. Jugurtha again returns to warring against his cousins. And in 112 BC, he captures Serta. Serta is a town in Numidia on the coast, modern-day Sirte, and it is full of Italian traders who had actually been opposed to Jugurtha. And these Italian traders helped to organize the defenses, and so when Jugurtha captures it, he massacres them. And this is actually pretty shocking. There may have also been Roman citizens among them. This fact is actually a reminder that there is now a big Roman and Italian diaspora across the Mediterranean of businessmen, negotiatores, who are fanning across into the provinces, basically using their connections with Rome, using the fact that they're either Roman citizens or Italians, to operate under favorable conditions. So anyway, they are killed by Jugurtha. But this rather shocking act, also the fact that Jugurtha has now completely run ramshod over the Roman settlement of 116 BC, leads to a Roman declaration of war. So in 112 BC, Roman armies led by a guy named Cornelius Bestia enter into Numidia, and then they very quickly make peace. And this is seen as somewhat surprising. It leads to rumors that Bestia has been bribed. Indeed, there is a kind of investigation that's undertaken, and the Senate even briefly gives Jugurtha safe passage to go to Rome to testify about who he has or hasn't bribed. And this, of course, turns into even more of a debacle, because while in Rome, under safe passage, Jugurtha arranges a attempted hit against another one of his distant relatives who is living in Rome and is seen as a possible successor. So The Senate angrily revokes the safe passage and sends Jugurtha back to Numidia, supposedly leaving the city. At least the historian Sallust, who's writing in the 30s BC, supposedly Sallust imagines Jugurtha looking back at Rome as he leaves and laughing about how this is a city for sale. Again, it is widely believed, may not be true, but it's widely believed that Jugurtha has liberally bribed a number of Roman senators. So therefore, the Romans resume the war. In 110, another consular army sails to Numidia, lands, only to find itself defeated and forced to surrender. Another shocking military setback. It seems the issue has to do that the consul, Claudius Albinus, leaves the army under his brother while he's out of the province, and the brother somehow allows himself to be surrendered and is forced to negotiate a treaty to get out under kind of safe passage. This is somewhat similar to what happened in Numantia under Hostilius Mancius. So now you have basically a non-stop series of diplomatic and military debacles. And this leads to a commission that is set up by the tribune Mamilius, the Mamilian Commission, which is designed to prosecute Roman aristocrats who are seen as either having been bribed by Jugurtha or having somehow betrayed the Roman people to Jugurtha. And this commission produces a series of successful prosecutions resulting in exile. It's kind of notable that a lot of the guys who are prosecuted by this commission are also in some way or another connected to the repression of Gaius Gracchus and his followers. Indeed, one of the people who is especially targeted and who does go into exile is Lucius Opimius. So there's some sense that while it targets, a lot of big figures, Cornelius Bestia and Claudius Albinus, that some of these prosecutions are also a way of kind of getting even. People who had been sympathetic to Gracchus use the commission to kind of get even to these opponents of Gracchus who have now found themselves exposed during the early phases of the Jugurthine debacle. At any rate, in 109 BC, a new commander is sent to Numidia. This is Caecilius Metellus, and he actually proves basically pretty effective. In the sense that he stops digging. He forces Jugurtha to essentially take to the periphery of his kingdom, not wanting to confront finally a seriously well-led Roman army. By all accounts, Metellus is a pretty good commander, but Metellus can't actually pin down and defeat Jugurtha. So the war is now dragging on in a kind of stalemate for 2 years. And at this point, one of Metellus's officers, a legate, essentially someone who's handpicked to serve as a kind of staff officer, named Gaius Marius, asks for leave so that he can return to Rome and run for consul. And it seems that Marius, up till now, has probably been somewhat of a client of the Metellus family. He is a new man, so no one in his family has ever held the consulship. He is from a small Italian town, the town of Arpinum, which only received citizenship, full citizenship, in 188 BC. Before that, they had been cives sine suffragio. And Marius has, up till now, served as tribune of the plebs. He's been a premier in Spain, but probably, in fact, this is why he's picked to go as a legate. Probably he's been, again, a kind of an ally of the Caecilii Metelli. But now there seems to be a bit of a rift between Marius and Caecilius, but Caecilius Metellus gives Marius the furlough that he wants to run for consul. Marius goes and wins the consulship in 107, and also has a law passed specifically assigning him the command in Numidia. The Senate had actually been content to give Metellus more time, but here Marius finds a friendly tribune of the plebs. That tribune of the plebs carries a bill that says Marius will now have the province of Numidia, replacing his old boss. Now the Senate does not want to allow Marius the ability to have a levy, to actually levy troops, which he would need as reinforcements. This is, again, kind of this constitutional hardball after Marius overrules the senatorial allotment of provinces. And so Marius goes ahead and says, well, fine, I'll take volunteers, including proletarii. He probably levies about 5,000, or not levies, he probably takes about 5,000 volunteers. Now, Marius's recruitment of the proletariat is sometimes, or actually even often, treated as a kind of watershed moment in Roman military history. The idea being up till now, in order to serve in the legions, you'd had to be an assiduous, a man who has sufficient property back at home, whereas with Marius now staffing his army, at least in part with proletarii, this now leads to sort of the rise of professional soldiers who have no farm to go back to and are also willing to follow any general who is willing to give them money or land. The idea that staffing armies with money-grubbing proletarii kind of leads towards the Civil War. I'll be honest, I don't think that interpretation is necessarily correct. If you look back into the 3rd and 2nd century BC, we have quite a lot of evidence for proletarii being recruited in moments of military emergency. Also, Marius just doesn't recruit all that many. So it's unclear that overall his armies that he ultimately has in Numidia will include a small number of proletarii, but the rest will be assidui, like Roman armies always have been. Again, this may be something where, while Marius seems to come under some critique even at the time, it's unclear that he's radically transforming how Roman military recruitment works. Nonetheless, Marius goes to Numidia. He replaces Caecilius Metellus. Metellus, the Senate gives Metellus a pretty good reception. He's allowed to triumph, and he accepts the title of Numidicus, even though the war isn't over yet. Marius pretty quickly runs into the same darn problem that Metellus ran into. He's able to control significant chunks of Numidia, but Jugurtha has a pretty good sense that as long as he can hold out with his army in the periphery, he can, he remains a viable king once the Romans leave. In fact, he somewhat is replicating the strategy that Massinissa had used way, way back in the day. That is, as long as you've got at least some armed followers and at least a distant claim to the throne, hang on and see what happens. Therefore, the Jugurtha is ultimately only defeated through treachery. And this treachery is arranged by Marius's quaestor named Cornelius Sulla. We're going to hear a lot more about him as well in coming lectures. Sulla basically arranges for the king of Mauritania, the next people over from the Numidians, to betray Jugurtha. So Jugurtha is lured into what he thinks is going to be a meeting with Bocchus, the king of Mauritania, and instead there is Sulla. This is way out in the desert on the kind of border between Numidia and Mauritania, but Sulla sneaks up there with a small contingent of troops, and these capture Jugurtha and ultimately bring him back to Marius. And with the capture of Jugurtha, the war is effectively over. Now the Romans still have to find a candidate to be on the Numidian throne because Jugurtha basically killed almost everyone, and they ultimately settle on a guy named Guda, one of Jugurtha's half-brothers. And so he will continue to govern Numidia, although chunks of Numidia are given to Mauritania as a bit of a thank you, and I think some others are absorbed into the Roman province in Africa. But Marius has successfully won. So he returns back to Rome, himself ready to triumph. However, at this moment, Rome is now facing an even more severe military emergency. This emergency comes from the north. Namely, there has been a great migration, probably a migration that somewhat resembles the migrations of Germanic tribes that enter into the Roman Empire in the 5th century AD. But here, a group of people probably initially living around Denmark, or southern Denmark, the Jutland Peninsula, the Cimbri and the Teutones, they've been displaced, possibly due to tidal flooding. So perhaps they start off as climate refugees, but they just start marauding through Europe. And here are these kind of displaced peoples, which includes the warriors, but also women and children on huge wagon trains. They may kind of discover that they can kind of keep moving through other people's territories and act like a shark. As long as they keep moving, they can pillage what they need to survive. They may not be able to claim new land for themselves, but they can kind of continue to exist as this kind of now just sort of self-sustaining kind of pillaging operation. They go all through Gaul, and they start to encounter Roman armies around 112 BC, and between 112 and 105 inflict a series of defeats, serious defeats. And finally, in 105, they are confronted by two Roman armies at Arousal in what's now southern France. This is an area that has only very recently been incorporated into the Roman Empire. In the late 120s, the Romans finally engaged in a series of military expeditions to incorporate this part of Transalpine Gaul as a Roman province. It seems partially so that they actually now have a land link between Italy and Spain. So the Cimbri enter into this province. They are met by a consul and proconsul. So two armies should be enough to repel the Cimbri, although the Cimbri and Teutones do seem to be quite numerous. We get exaggerated numbers, but it's quite likely it's over 50,000 warriors. Unfortunately, the consul and proconsul at Arousal don't get along. They each want to take credit for defeating the Cimbri. And so the proconsul attacks first. His army is routed by the Cimbri, and the survivors then retreat and disrupt the army of the consul. And as a result, at Arousal, the Cimbri and Teutones maul two Roman armies, darn near annihilating both of them, and inflicting what is quite likely the worst Roman military defeat since the Battle of Cannae. Our sources report upwards of 80,000 killed. I think that's quite too high, but it's not unlikely that say, 20,000 Romans and Italians are killed that day. And now there's very little standing between the Romans, the Roman Italy, and the Cimbri. Fortunately for the Romans, the Cimbri instead go into keep kind of moving. And the one problem with the Cimbri is they don't have any logistics. They always have to pillage, and there's only so much you can pillage in any place. So the Cimbri keep moving on. They go back up into France. They eventually go down into northern Spain, and then come back up. And it's clear that they are going to be a very, very serious threat to the Romans going forward. Therefore, in 105, Marius is elected, rather than just simply saying, well, he's finished out his proconsular term in Numidia. He therefore runs for consul again. And this is actually, it's not totally unprecedented. Again, during the Second Punic War, another moment of intense military crisis, we had men who flouted the norm that you only hold your second consulship without 10 years passing, most notably Fabius Maximus and Claudius Marcellus both hold a series of consulships during the Second Punic War. But there now is technically a law passed in 180, the Lex Delia Annalis, that says, no, this is now no longer a norm, it's now a law. You have to have 10 years between your two consulships. And the Lex Delia also regulates some other aspects of the cursus norm, probably formalizing it a bit. That said, this is the problem with the way that the Roman quote-unquote constitution works. In theory, the Roman people are sovereign, and that means that the sovereign Roman people, regardless of, the Roman sovereign people can pass a law, but the Roman sovereign people can then also say, well, regardless of that law, we would like Marius to be consul again. So he is elected to his second consulship for 105. He offends the Senate badly by triumphing over the Numidians. And at the end of this triumph, Jugurtha is thrown into the dungeon at the base of the Capitoline and left to starve to death. But Marius is still dressed in his triumphal garb. Triumphant general has a special cloak that's dyed. He has special shoes. In some instances, he may paint his face red. But in his triumphal garb, he then enters into the Senate as part of his consular inauguration. This deeply offends the senators, that he sort of lords over them as a triumphator and now new consul. This seems to be a way of Marius kind of goading the Senate, and again, deliberately kind of flouting certain norms. Nonetheless, he now takes a new army. It's not only he actually doesn't take his old proletariat that he recruited for Numidia, he instead takes the army that the previous consul, also a military reformer named Rutilius Rufus, he takes that and goes up to Gaul to await the Cimbri and Teutones. However, they don't immediately come, and so another year passes, he runs for consul again and is elected. Another year passes, he runs for consul again and is reelected, and then another year. So altogether, he will now serve, in addition to his consulship for Numidia, he'll serve 5 more consulships as he waits for the Cimbri and Teutones, who finally do come. Finally, Marius in 102 BC confronts half of this migration, the Cimbri, at the Battle of Aquae Sextii in southern Gaul. He manages to hide away a detachment of troops on part of the battlefield, confronts the Cimbri. There's fierce fighting, but finally, at the very end of the battle, these troops sneak out and smash into the rear of the Cimbri, and a great slaughter ensues. Marius then goes back to Italy because the next year, the Teutones, who have separated themselves from the Cimbri, they've kind of gone in 2 different columns, the Teutones cross the Alps and confront Marius's consular colleague, Catullus, in Italy. Marius moves his troops into Italy, and another great battle is fought at Vercellae. Here, our depictions of the battle are somewhat difficult, in part because it seems that we are informed by Sulla's highly deceptive memoir that is used by Plutarch. Nonetheless, we can safely say that the combined armies of Marius and Catullus defeat and annihilate the Teutones. So finally, this terrible threat of Germanic invasion, the kind of threat that, again, somewhat multiplied, will ultimately bow over the Western Empire in late antiquity. It is defeated. So next time, we'll talk about Marius is now on his 6th consulship. We'll talk about what happens once he comes back to Rome and tries to engage in sort of standard Roman politics to disastrous effect.